All right, full disclosure, I don't know why I'm even doing this presentation. In fact, I do not understand why the Sacramento History Museum did not stop me. I mean, why would I, Sean, with the Sacramento History Museum, manager of the tour programs, including the old Sacramento Underground Tour, why would I now spend time revealing clues about the underground to the city when we have an underground tour that you could take? And the only conclusion I've arrived at is that you watching are history stalwarts, and you only find this enriching, so you have to take the pledge with me to make sure that's true. So raise your right hand, and if it's holding the phone, switch hands. I state your name. No, don't just say state your name. I've heard that before. It still counts if you do that. I promise that this information will only enrich the special joy I have for the underground, and it will just enhance my experience when I do go on the underground, or take it again with friends and family, many friends and family, as will be allowed under COVID restrictions and that sort of thing. I'm not going to just be cheap. I'm going to listen to this, and I'm going to go on the underground tour. Okay, you promise no take backs, no crossies. All right, so now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to show you secrets about the underground. And we're down here at the water's edge. We're down here at the bank of the mighty Sacramento, because this is one of the best clues and the one that too few people take advantage of. This is one of my favorite places to be, especially in the early morning in old Sacramento, down by the water's edge. By the way, Allie's operating the camera. It's her birthday tomorrow. She promises that even if she somehow slips and falls into the cold Sacramento River, she will throw the audiovisual equipment to me, and that will be saved at least. But anyway, so here is the main clue why we're down at the water. Because what I want to tell you is this: Sacramento used to be here, and now Sacramento is way up there. So, recapping our main story today, Sacramento was here, now is way up there. So, if you come down here in the early morning, as I suggest, just know that Sacramento City began right on the banks of the Sacramento River. It was created out of expediency. I don't know if you can hear that music from the boat on the river, but if you can hear it, just go ahead and dance. Established out of expediency because of the gold rush. The other rival choice was about 3 miles down the Sacramento, a place to be called Sutterville. There's still a Sutterville Road. That was the choice of Captain John Sutter. It was safe from whatever the river had to offer. In other words, that city would be high on a bluff above the water stage. It would require a lot of infrastructure. That's a buzzword we've been hearing a lot in the last few years. It would require stairs and other means of getting stuff from the river up to the shore, but that's where it was going to be. But no, the decision was here at a shallow space along the river where gold seekers could come. Also, the American River. Allie will show you the I Street Bridge where these boats are heading. That bridge, by the way, is 110 years old this year, and just upriver of that was the mouth of the American River, which is flowing into the Sacramento, and all these gold seekers traveling thousands of miles know that the gold was found on the South Fork of the American River, about 50 miles east of where we're standing. They can smell the gold. So they're certainly not going to stop 3 miles further downriver in order to get the gold. They're going to stop here. And so this is the place where it was built. Now, they suffered. They paid the price for that expediency, and that's what we're going to go look at now. We're going to go up. We're going to climb to where the city is now, where they invested in a great deal of infrastructure after the fact. Who knew? I mean, who knew that a river, if you build a city right against a river and right next to another river, that it could flood and damage would result? Oh, by the way, if you hear heavy pounding on the ramp, it's because I'm wearing a weird boot on my foot. Don't mind me. Allie says I'll be fine. Doctor said, no, you probably shouldn't, but Allie wants this done, and I could trip over that. And Allie's looking after me. So, okay, we should stop here. At about the height of the first levee, when Sacramento now became known as the Levee City, this is thanks to Hardin Bigelow, a man with mining experience, came here via Massachusetts and Michigan, and the city suffered the first who knew. 1849 was high and dry. 1850, the first official year of the city, the first month of the first official year of the city, suffered a flood because it rained very hard. And when you build a city right next to the banks of two rivers, it floods. So Hardin Bigelow springs into action. He's got mining experience, engineering experience, and he rallies the city. We must build a levee. And so we were standing a few minutes ago. That's about 6 feet above the water level. That's as high as the levees were that Hardin Bigelow spurred the city in action to build. So 6 feet along the Sacramento River, 3 feet high along the American. The town rallies, the town invests. Hardin Bigelow spends a considerable part of his own fortune on building these levees. An impressive 9 miles. I mean, these levees started below Sutterville and kept going up the Sacramento and then up the American, approximately to where Sac State University is now. It's 9 miles. Now, the greater Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta relies on more than 1,500 miles of levees. We literally live by the levees, including Sacramento. Well, you've probably heard the adage, we tend to fight the current war with the last war's weapons and tactics. It's the same with the levees. We tend to build the levee for the last disaster. And so Sacramento, over time, over the first decade, kept raising those levees after each flood, because it happened in 1852, in 1853, in 1854, and the city would rally and invest and raise the levees a little bit higher, but then the next succeeding flood would overtop those levees. And they kept doing it like that until finally the storm that caused the city to go from all the way down there to where we are soon heading, we've got a few more feet, which happened in 1861, shortly before Christmas time, 1861, and continued about 45 days into 1862, and overtopped those levees, and the city then sprung into action. Well, I can't say they sprung into action. They lollygagged for a couple of years, and then a couple of years after that flood, finally decided they would lift the city up to its current height.
I'm right here, buddy.
And they had a ready partner at that time, because it just so happens the Central Pacific Railroad wanted to make the terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad right here in Sacramento. And because they did, the Central Pacific Railroad said, we'll build that levee for you. We'll get it to the height you need. You let us lay our tracks on that levee. And the city said, right on, or the 19th century equivalent of that. And so then the city and the business owners could spend their money on the improvements they had to make. Now, there's one key point of difference I want to make, is that we're at the height of the levee now, and you can't tell, especially if you don't go down by the river, that there was that steep drop off to the river. And most levees, if you're familiar with levees in the Sacramento area, most levees are just walls. I mean, they're taped wide at the base, thin at the middle, often have a flat space for a road on the top. And if you've driven around in Natomas or in River Park area, you're familiar with the levees, especially if you walked on the road to the levees, that a river would be on one side and housing would be down below the other side. That's typical of levees. It's just a wall. This is unusual in that the city chose to take this high point and then, as part of its plan to save the city from the flooding, just leveled off approximately from that high point. That high point was established, I love this part, by a member of the Board of Supervisors named Stephen Hite. Destined for this job, I know. Spelled his last name H-I-T-E. And the supervisors agreed that the levee would be established at 22 feet 9 inches. As one of our beloved tour guides, Miss Odessa, is wont to say, not 22 feet, not 23 feet, not 24, not 25, but 22 feet 9 inches. Why? Well, the flood that they are building for overtopped at 23 feet. And so I'm thinking the gamble was, flood like that's not going to come again, so we'll just set the flood height at about that and we'll be good. The decree further said that the next building can be no lower than 18 inches of that 22 feet 9 inches. So that gets you a total of 24 feet 3 inches that we're walking on. I rounded out to 25 just for that sake. We are essentially 2 stories above Sacramento River. So now we're ready to show you another clue.
So who knows?
And I apologize, I'm going to do a little bit of myth busting. Buck up, you'll be okay. We're going here, this lovely parking lot. This is where the Adams, McNeil and Company wholesale grocers held forth. Front Street was Wholesale Row. Why? Well, because here's not only the Central Pacific Railroad taking your goods across country, but also the Sacramento Valley Railroad heading this way along our street and then on up to Folsom. Eventually that railroad is swallowed up by the Southern Pacific and that rail line goes all the way up to Shingle Spring. So Adams McNeil Company has its site here. It sold liquors. It also was an agent for the California Powder Company, which sold gunpowder and blasting caps. I'm not sure those two products are a really good mix. I'm sure they regulated it so it wouldn't be explosive. So here's your clue without going underground to the results of the lifting. In our spaces, you would see this. These are the walls that were made to lift up the streets, because in the lifting of the streets, the city, they had to start with the streets. They were just a tool. They were just a means to an end. I'll explain why in a bit. Let's go over here as a better view, and we'll come back to that corner in a bit. So this area is lifted approximately 23 feet, 24 feet 3 inches, a long way. I talked to our city historian, Marcia Iman. She said that if you were to dig around the wall and these buttresses holding up the wall, well, you get in big trouble by several levels of government for vandalizing property. No, she said if you were somehow allowed to dig, these walls and these buttresses likely go fairly deep. They probably go 20 feet deep. So these buttresses hold up the walls. The walls held up the streets. So the walls built on either side of the street, and in between the walls went a lot of dirt, really a lot of muck. And a good deal of that muck came from the American River, because that was part of the process too. The American River was causing all of this problem. In fact, the mechanics of the 61-62 flood, it was a triple whammy. It was a really, really, really heavy, cold, deep snow. That storm was massive. It was followed almost immediately by a heavy, wet, warm rain, which immediately melted that snow. The snow immediately deposited into the many watersheds in the Sierra. And the third leg of that disaster is that by this time, the 1860s, California was well into using hydraulic mining to look for gold, which is 20-foot long water nozzles, essentially, drawing water from high in the mountains at high pressure, shooting it at hillsides because geologists knew that the riverbeds probably leaned up on its side over time, and that they're laying in the mountains. If we just wash away the mountains, wash away the gravel from the ancient riverbeds, gold was deposited there, let's get it there. And so in the search for gold through hydraulic mining, that debris just all washed into the watershed too. So now the river's thick with debris and what have you. And also the city caused its own problem because in addition to that impressive levee system, the city had built a levee around behind to the back of Sacramento, approximately where main Business 80 is now. Well, that storm came at such a rush down the American River that it broke the levee near the juncture of 160 and Business 80. It flowed behind where Sutter's Ford is now, flowed south toward the rail line for the Sacramento Valley Railroad. The trestles on the elevated line were clogged, and so the debris and floodwater had no place to go and now was backing into the city. And so the city had created a bowl into which all this rushing water would come and then sit. And so it took a while for the city to actually break that jam and cause the water to roll out. So that's why the city's up here. And so the American River had to be straightened, and the mouth of it moved a mile north, and the muck from the digging that new channel was used to fill up the streets behind these walls. And this nondescript corner is the reason that our tours, though they are often called underground tunnels, we get calls all the time, I'd like to go take a tour of the underground tunnels. And believe me, I'd love for them to be tunnels, but they are not. These hollow sidewalks end right here at the tops of the alleys, and I'll show you that right now. So they don't go across the street. They don't even go around the block. The hollow sidewalks end at these tops of alleys. It is possible for, or it was possible for people to go down into these hollow sidewalks once the city was raised and go in front of buildings and around to the other side. When they were building the hollow sidewalks, I would love for them to have said, oh, it'd be great if we had tunnels. We could go underneath the city and do whatever. But the hollow sidewalks were about more than enough for the city. The business owners didn't like people traversing on the hollow sidewalks between their buildings because they could rob the buildings, and they did. You will see in the Hastings building when you take the underground tour, which you promised to do, bars on the spaces, and that was to prevent people from getting into the building if they managed to get into the underground sidewalk. So here's another main clue. Our wonderful alleys. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but the alleys in the city used to be fairly flat. And now you can see this young woman is going down the alleys on a great slope, and all of the alleys, well, all of the alleys. We have one alley in Old Sacramento, and at every intersection it rises and goes down, because when the city raised the streets, they raised the ends of the alleys to join the streets, but then left the middle of the alleys not at the original level, but fairly close. And this was a measure to abate flooding, to allow the water to drain off the streets in wet, mucky years. So the alleys are a convention, a result of the underground, of having lifted. Now I invite you to go on your hunting trip through Old Sacramento, look for clues. I'll tell you the last clue downtown as we get toward the end. But if you wander around in downtown, one of the things you can look for are manhole covers, not like, well, like that, but you're looking for a distinctive design. Utility covers. These utility covers are apparently forged in steel. Just press that button twice. Oh, there you go. Right on. The ones that I'm talking about are forged in steel. They have an array of stars around the edge, and you're likely to find them, if you find them at all, and I'd love for you to tell us if you found any. Because I'm not very good at finding them, and I don't know if your mother ever told you, but she often told me I couldn't find the Atlantic Ocean if I was standing in it, so I'm not the best reporter of this. But if you find these utility covers with the stars, usually on the corners of sidewalks, those are usually atop a cistern or a brick vessel built in the corner of the hollow sidewalk, and rainwater collects there, and the early firefighting efforts use those waters in the cisterns to fight the fires. Come over here, Allie, so the car doesn't run us over, and that would be a whole different story. The other thing to look for, right on the corner of sidewalks, there's just the tip of the corner on some sidewalks made of granite, and the rest of the sidewalk is made of concrete. And those granite tips of the corner and the utility covers are both the result of the lifting. Those are evidence of lifting. So now we've gone up the alley and we're crossing K Street. I'll tell you the third clue. I did find these. Look for these downtown. They're getting harder and harder to find. In the sidewalk, sometimes you will find a rectangle with multiple squares of glass embedded in that rectangle, usually a concrete frame. Those are skylights to underground spaces. And those were set in the early part of the 20th century. They replaced the original ones, which I'll show you in the museum when we end. The skylights I found, and if you're hungry, you can go, I'll plug them. So, as a Subway at 8th and J, sandwich shop, and as you open the door into the Subway, you walk right over one of these skylights. So they're distinctive because the glass in them, and there's also one at Break Time Mini Mart just around the corner on 8th between J and K Streets. This glass in those skylights are purple, beautiful amethyst color. And that's because the skylights, the glass was made with manganese, which was designed to make them nice and clear. The problem is that over time, it reacted with the sunlight and created a purple. And so the skylights are flat on the top, but they have pyramid shapes on the bottom, designed to allow the light to play to a wider area, refract, so that people had natural lighting as they used their hollow sidewalks, and many people did and still do to an extent, use their hollow sidewalks for storage and that sort of thing. Here's another clue. See on the ground, this is Pioneer Park. So this is approximately at the level where the meat market, the city meat market was. It's called Pioneer Park, named for the Pioneer Bakery next door. This wall's part of that. And the Sacramento Pioneer Society, its original headquarters was in the upper floor of this building. Their building is now at 7th and between J and K, I believe, or K and L. So this is the original level. It's now a park. These cast iron columns had adorned buildings in Old Sacramento over time, and during the redevelopment of Old Sacramento, they were taken off buildings and put together for some reason here. That's not how they're just facades, but the way they're put together sometimes makes them look like whole columns. And Just nice feature. Okay, so most of these buildings, as a general rule that we see, were lifted up during the 13 years it took for the city to lift. Not all. Some of them were destroyed. And I'll show you one that was in the process of being expanded while the city was undergoing the lifting. Another place you can go to, and you can go inside the hollow sidewalks there, is at the corner of I and 2nd Street. That is called Pioneer Square. Originally, it was the site of an assay office. L.A. Laureate was the man who would weigh your gold and pay you what it was worth so you can go spend your money in town. At the time of the lifting, it was an architectural and contractors business. It now houses wine tasting, restaurant, and there are shops within the hollow sidewalk. Here's another clue people overlook. The most photographed setting, I think, in Old Sacramento. I've seen people get their pictures here all the time. Doesn't make sense to have a door 8 feet off the ground, but it's kind of the result of the lifting. So again, the alleys were lifted at the end, left low in the middle for water to drain. This is the Hall Lures Wholesale Groceries Company. They're, again, taking advantage of the location and using the railroads. And they would also take advantage of the fact that freight wagons could come down here, loading or unloading supplies. That is the street level. So if you could open this door and walk to 2nd Street, you'd be right at street level. And so the employees of Hall Lures Wholesale Grocers would just open those doors, offload from the top of the very tall freight wagons, bring their goods where they needed to go. The business had wheeled cars and its own specialized track on the floors to move equipment around, which is kind of cool. So this is not possible without the lifting. We wouldn't have thought of this door without the lifting. All right, Mechanics Exchange Building, which was an apartment hotel for workers of the Goss and Lombard ironworks, and there are a lot of ironworks here where the Railroad Museum is now. This was in the process of expanding when the order was made to carry out the lifting. And so this building was not lifted. This building happily had a first floor, complete with an archway for a door. And so when the lifting was required and the ends of the alley was lifted for this drainage, well, then access to this first floor was no longer possible. It was bricked in, and then, as happened with some floors, they just reordered the floor. So this is the basement, and now this was once the second floor, it's the first floor, and so on. So that's a clue. And there's a bricked in window. I'll go show you the original skylight. So right there is the Pioneer Square at 2nd and I Street. Go there, eat, drink, be merry. Peek your head inside an actual underground hollow sidewalk. We've been debating about the original building. Our museum is a recreation of the City Hall and Waterworks. Waterworks had 2 tanks of water that supplied water to the city by gravity. It was built in 1854, and that predates the lifting. And so we think we have the picture that the building being heavy because of those water tanks itself was not lifted. And in fact, the original building was still at its level. Now here's where it's questionable to me, because we're talking about 25 feet. The building was, I don't think the building could have been 25 feet lower, but it was lower than the surrounding buildings. And instead, a system of staircases went down from the street level, the lifted street level, to the front entrance of the building. The beautiful and terrible fact about history is that you find out a lot, and then you find out you have so much more that you have to find out. And then our burden is trying to share and interpret that history, but knowing that what we know about it is still to be researched. And if we had planned this, we would have turned on the lights in the museum, but I didn't tell Allie we were coming inside to show you a set of the original skylights found on J Street. And these are set in iron, and these are kind of like, oh, Mike is the man. Mike, turn on the lights for us. Yeah. Kind of discs or wafers of, in this case, quartz, supply natural light to the sidewalks, the hollow sidewalks, in case you wanted to store it. So now I've given you every secret. Go to 8th Street between J and K, you'll see modern versions of these skylights. Tours are going on Fridays through Sundays. Fridays 1, 2:30, and 4. Saturdays and Sundays 11, 12:30, and 2. And in May we'll start the underground after hours tours on Saturday evenings at 6. Next Monday, Allie's going to be in front of the camera, and she's going to talk about archaeology of the underground spaces. And then the 2 Mondays from now, our director, Delta Pickmello, will offer one of her wonderful stories. So I've revealed all the secrets. Go down to the river, have fun, go look for yourself, and I'll see you on the tours.